Today I'm making this beautiful pincushion called a Biscornu. It's a 3D octagonal shape that's created by sewing two squares together in a unique way that's surprisingly simple. We'll start by collaging some simple shapes onto each square and then add some slow stitching. From there, we will stitch the squares together to form the pincushion and stuff it, and finally add buttons. I'm going to share all the supplies you need and walk you step by step through sewing and stuffing this beautiful keepsake. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started and make a Biscornu. I have 2 squares of wool felt, and each one is 4 by 4 inches, or 10 by 10 centimeters. On each piece, I've made marks right in the center of each side. So right at the 2-inch mark, I've made small notch marks. And for this, I've used a heat erasable pen. And that's going to be important later when I stitch these 2 pieces together, because instead of putting them right on top of each other, I'm going to offset the corners where I put the first corner in the middle, and then the middle of the piece on top will go on the corner of the other piece. And I'm going to keep going, and it's going to make this beautiful shape for the Biscornu pincushion. I need to make one more mark in the very center of this 4-inch piece. So I'm bringing out my ruler and I'm putting it right up against those marks that are on the sides. And I'm going to put a dot right there at 2 inches. And I can even rotate this piece and check and make sure that it's exactly in the center. And these center dots are going to be where the buttons are going to be placed near the very end of the process. So I'm going to need 2 buttons. So I've got this yellow-green color. You can really pick any colors here. I could try and match the colors. I can put a blue on the pink and a pink on the blue. Really, you can do whatever you want here. And now I'm going to choose some thread, and I'm going to be using pearl cotton size 8. This is a beautiful twisted thread, and it's going to work really well for this project. With the pearl cotton size 8, I'm going to be using a chenille needle size 24. Here's a couple of examples of the chenille needle. You can also use a milliner's needle size 1 or 3, or a long darner number 1. The other thing I'm going to be using is ground walnut shells. These shells are ground very fine, almost like a sand. And walnut shells work really well inside of pincushions. They help to keep your needles sharp, and they also add some weight. I used walnut shells when I made this pincushion. This is a smaller pincushion that I use all the time. And if you want to see how this one came together, I'll put a link in the description. And it shows the process for making that. The other thing I'm going to use is Fiberfil stuffing. And if you don't have walnut shells, you can just use Fiberfil stuffing. You can even use fabric scraps to stuff the inside of the pincushion. Really, anything goes. And this pincushion has both Fiberfil and the crushed walnuts inside. And just like for that project, I like to encase my walnut shells in a small bag. And for that, I'm using some nylon. And I still have some pieces here. This is some scrap nylon. And that's just to keep those really small walnut shells that also have some dust in them. It keeps them from coming outside of your pincushion. And so using that mesh bag keeps everything inside. And if you're wondering where to find these shells, they can often be found at pet supply stores. So there's lots of options for stitching here. And one of them is adding some fabric collage that you can applique on top. So I have this piece of dyed fabric, and the color is really close to this really deep pink color. So I'm going to cut some pieces of fabric from this strip, and I've decided to cut some triangle shapes. So I've cut 4 triangles. They're about 3 by 3.5 centimeters, or 1 inch by 1.5 inches. And I'm going to place them around on this blue piece. And just be aware that if you're using fabric, that it this is raw edge and it does tend to fray. I'm going to be stitching it down. That's going to help somewhat with the fraying. But if you're using this as a pincushion, you may experience some fraying. So if you don't want that, I have another option that's going to help keep those fraying fabric pieces away. And that's felt squares. So I've got some of this yellow-green wool felt and I've cut some squares and I'm going to place them on this pink piece. So that's another great option for adding some color, is just to use more felt. So now I'm going to stitch these pieces down, and to help me keep them in place, I'm going to use some light adhesive. There are lots of different kinds, and this one is called Steam-A-Seam 2, and it's very thin tape. So I'm starting a new pack here today. So it has this blue color on the end to help you get started, and it's double-sided tape. So you snip off a piece that fits on the back of the piece of fabric you want to adhere, and then when it is stuck on, you can peel off that paper backing, and what's left is the piece that's going to melt with heat and adhere your piece of fabric. And the directions for how to do that are on the back of the package. So I'm going to add this light adhesive on all the pieces. I have them on my triangles, and now I'm going to add some to the back of these squares. Once everything is where I want it, I can iron it in place. And now that everything's ironed, I'm ready to start stitching. So I'm using my Pearl Cotton size 8, and I'm simply going to surround each piece of fabric with stitching. I'm taking straight stitches, and I'm using a contrasting color, so those stitches are really going to stand out. And I've worked my way around that first piece. I'm going to continue and surround all these pieces in the same way. Before I do that, you may have noticed that my marking lines have disappeared, and that's because I used heat erasable marker, and I've placed an iron on this to attach all these pieces of fabric. So I'm going to come back in and I'm going to add those marks. I've completed the stitching on 3 of the 4 triangles. And I want to stop and point out that when you add stitching, you're going to have maybe some puckering and maybe even some unevenness on your sides, and that's okay. To avoid this becoming too severe, when you're stitching, pull those stitches firmly but not too tight. So all you have to do is make sure that this stitch is holding its place and it's not looking loose, but pulling it overly tight is going to contribute to the waviness. So try and find a nice balance between having nice clean stitches and having stitches that are pulling everything and causing unevenness. And now that I've completed the stitching on my blue piece, stitching around those triangles, I'm going to bring out a new color, still working in Pearl Cotton size 8 and still using that chenille needle size 24. I've picked a color that isn't an exact match to that blue, but it's very close, especially when you take one strand and you hold it up. It's looking like a nice match. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to stitch around all 4 of these yellow-green squares. I stitched in the same way, just going around all the edges, and that's added a nice hint of color. So now the other place I want to add stitching is in the center area around where that button's going to be. You can really do anything you want here. So I'm going to begin stitching, and I'm using the same color that I'd used to stitch around these triangles. And I'm going to go in a circular pattern with straight stitches. This is the running stitch. I'm going around and around and around, and I'm going to work my way towards the center. So here it is, all stitched. My stitches aren't perfect, and that's part of the charm of the running stitch, and I'm liking the way that that looks with that button in the center. So now I'm going to add some stitching on my other piece. I'm going to try something different. So I began in the middle, and I stitched a square, and now I'm just going to go around each square, sort of connecting them and extending that grid pattern. I'm going to work my way all around And that's added a really nice detail. I like how simple and clean that looks. So now it's time to stitch these two pieces together. So I'm going to take the corner of one piece and I'm going to align it with those marks that I've made. And I'm working with the wrong sides together, so the right sides are both facing out. So I have those aligned and I'm going to start here. My thread is knotted. I'm going to start right at that corner. And I'm going to take a couple of whip stitches to secure that very beginning part. And now that that's together and secure, I'm going to use the blanket stitch. You could also use the whip stitch here, whatever you prefer. And I'm going to place my stitches fairly close together. And I'm going to work my way out to that edge there, the pink edge. And then when I'm at the edge, I'm going to grab the blue fabric and I'm going to bring the corner of that fabric right to the center marking on my pink piece. I'm going to grab a small clip and hold that in place. And then I'm going to continue with my blanket stitch. I'm going to go around the corner and continue on and work all the way to the edge. So that blue piece is behind here, and I'm working right to the edge of that blue piece. It's a little awkward having the clip there. You could also use a pin. It may not get in the way as much and catch as much as I'm having my thread catch here on that clip. So I'm getting to the edge of my thread and I want to tie off inside so I can start a new length of thread. So I'm just going to go down inside and I'm going to sneak my needle in through that wool felt, checking to make sure I'm not coming through to the front. I'm going to pull that thread through and make a knot and tie off. And then with my new thread, I can just come up where I left off and bring my needle up into that last loop of the blanket stitch and continue. So here I'm coming up with my thread. I'm working my way right to the edge there of that blue piece. And then when I get to the edge, I'm going to bring the pink corner and align it with that middle marking on the blue and place another clip and then just keep going in this same manner all the way around until I have just two corners left. So I'm coming to the end here on this pink piece. I'm going to go right to the edge. And this is where I'm going to stop. If I did one more edge here, the opening wouldn't be big enough for me to add the stuffing. So this is a good place to stop. I'm going to take the needle off my thread and just let that thread hang. And I'm going to start by adding some of the polyfill stuffing. I'm going to try to work that into those corners. I'm going to add a little more, just pushing it all into place. So now I'm ready to add my walnuts. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a little bag. So I have this piece of nylon, and really what I need is a circular piece. So I'm going to draw a rough circular shape. And then I have a short piece of thread, and I'm going to go in and out all around this circle that I drew. And that's going to draw everything together. I'm going to pull on that thread. And so now I'm going to fill that little bag with the walnuts. So I've put down a piece of wax paper because this can get a little messy. Some of this can spill, and I have a funnel I've placed inside that bag, and I'm just going to start pouring in those walnuts. I'm going to take my time and shake those in, and keep adding and adding. And I'm going to pull that bag closed and take a look at how full it is. And I think I want a little bit more in there. So I'm just going to keep adding. And then I'm going to close that bag. I'm going to pull the bag tight and cinch it together, and then take some stitches all the way around to hold everything so it's not going to come undone. And then I'm going to take some scissors and I'm going to snip off the top part of that bag. And now I'm ready to insert that inside my pincushion. I'm going to push some of that polyfill to the side and try and place that bag right in the center. And then I'm going to grab some more polyfill and try to work everything around so that little bag's in the center and the polyfill is all around it. And when I'm happy with that, I'm going to do those last two sides that I have left to stitch closed. I'm going to re-add a clip, and I'm going to put my needle back on the thread, and I'm going to continue stitching in the same way as before. And it's a little more awkward because the pincushion is now completely stuffed, and I just take my time and stitch those last edges closed. And then when I worked my way all the way back to the beginning and everything is stitched closed, I'm going to work that thread in and out a few times, take a really small knot and weave that last bit of thread in and out, and then snip it off. So now this pincushion is closed and it's stuffed, and all I need to do is add the two buttons. So I'm taking a new length of pearl cotton, and I've switched to that darker color, and the same needle, and I'm going right in the middle, and my knot is right there. It's going to be covered by the button. And I put the button on the thread, and now I want to go through to the other side, and my needle is too short to make it to the other side. So I'm going to pull out the longest needle that I have. This is a doll needle. You don't necessarily need one this long, but it does help to have a really long needle as you're going back and forth on the two sides. So I'm going through the button. This has 4 holes, so I'm going to work with all 4 of these holes, and I'm going to be making an X. You don't have to, I just like the look of that. So I'm going in with my needle, and I'm coming right out in the center on the other side. I'm threading on my second button, and then I'm going to go back and forth several times between the different holes of the button. And I'm pulling on that thread, but I'm not pulling so hard that it's going to break. And I'm using my other hand to pinch the pincushion together to really make that indent that I want with those 2 buttons. So I keep going back and forth in this way, tightening these buttons down. And then I'm going to come up beside the button, and I'm going to take the thread and I'm going to wrap it. It's going to get tucked underneath this button. It's quite tight, so I'm pulling to slip it underneath there, and I'm going to go around a few times. And then I'm going to go back and forth, threading the thread through both buttons a few more times. And then instead of making a knot, because this is really tight and this pincushion is really full, I'm going to bring that needle out somewhere else. So I'm coming right at the edge of one of these triangles. I'm taking a tiny stitch, and I'm coming out in another spot and taking a tiny stitch, and I'm going to go back and forth like this, weaving this in and out. And after doing that a few times, I can snip off my thread. So this pincushion is very full, very firm. It has a nice weight to it because of those walnut shells. And I really like the shape of the Biscornu. Because the shape is so unique and beautiful, it lends itself to so many different possibilities for stitching. No matter how many of these you made, each one would always be unique. The possibilities for embellishing, decorating, and stitching on these are absolutely endless. I hope you enjoyed making a Biscornu with me today. I hope it's inspired you to make your own. These would make great gifts for anyone in your life who enjoys sewing. It's a really satisfying project that looks way more complex than it actually is to construct. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, happy stitching.